Hey, this is Will. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about setting up the Kubernetes scheduler. So I'm logged into my two Kubernetes control nodes, and what I need to do is I need to set up a systemd service for kube scheduler. So I'm going to move a file into place just like we did earlier with the kube controller manager. You may remember that kube controller manager needed one of these kube config files, and we have one for kube scheduler as well. And this is also one of those kube configs that we generated and uploaded in a previous lesson. So I'm just going to copy that kubescheduler.kubeconfig from my home directory to var/lib/kubernetes. Now that I have copied that file, I need to create a YAML configuration file for kube scheduler. The way that we're setting up kube scheduler in this course just requires us to have an additional YAML configuration file. So this is not the systemd unit file. This is just a YAML file. It's in etc kubernetes config kubescheduler.yaml, and there's just some standard configuration here that is configuring our Kubernetes cluster and how it's going to handle scheduling. And of course, we're also referencing that kubescheduler.kubeconfig. So that's how kubescheduler is going to know where that kubeconfig file is located. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that file. And now we're ready to create the systemd unit file. So this is just a standard systemd unit file. And instead of passing in a whole bunch of flags, we're using that kube-scheduler.yaml file. So we're actually pointing to that file that we just created right here in the systemd unit file. And that's all there is to it as far as setting up our systemd service for kube scheduler. But now that we've set up all three services, let's go ahead and get them started and get our services up and running. So I'm just going to clear the screen so we can see what's going on here. And I'm going to do a sudo systemctl daemon reload. And anytime we make changes to systemd unit files or we create new unit files, we need to do a daemon reload so that systemd will pick up those changes. So we're going to pick up all the changes that we just made in all three of those unit files over this lesson and the previous two lessons with this command. Now we're ready to go ahead and enable. So we're going to do sudo systemctl enable. And I'm going to list out all three of our services so that we'll enable them all in one command. I'll do kube API server, kube controller manager, and kube scheduler, all in one command. Enabling these services will ensure that they start up automatically when the server starts. And now, last but not least, I'm ready to go ahead and start the services. So I'll do a systemctl start, kube API server, kube controller manager, and kube scheduler. So now I have enabled and started all of my Kubernetes control plane services. Now that we've got our services up and running, it's a good idea to take a moment and make sure that everything is working and everything is set up properly so far. So we're going to do a little bit of verification just to make sure that everything's working the way that we expect it to. So I'm going to do yet another sudo systemctl command. This time I'm going to do a systemctl status. We're just going to make sure that our services started up correctly and that everything is up and running the way that we want it to be. So I'm going to do kube API server, kube controller manager, and kube scheduler. I could do all three of these in separate commands, but it's quicker just to do all three in a single command. So I'll need to scroll up a little bit to see the statuses of all these. It looks like my kube API server is active running. Same thing over here on the right. And I do need to make sure that I verify it's working on both control nodes, because if it's failing on one node, then of course my Kubernetes cluster is not going to be completely healthy. I can scroll down. My kube controller manager is active running on both servers. I'm going to need to scroll down this output a little bit further to see kube scheduler. And of course, there's kube scheduler which is active running. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Q to exit that. It looks like all three of my services are up and running on both nodes. Now that we've verified that our services are up and running, there's one more thing we can do to make sure that everything is okay and healthy so far. We've actually stood up our Kubernetes API server, so at this point, we can start querying the Kubernetes control plane and interacting directly with the Kubernetes control plane to get information from it. So I'm going to use kubectl to actually query our Kubernetes cluster and see if everything is healthy so far. I'm just going to do a kubectl get component statuses, and I need to pass in a kubeconfig to authenticate with the Kubernetes API. Luckily, I have this admin.kubeconfig file that we generated earlier, and that's what this file is for, is to allow us to authenticate with the API when we're using kubectl here on the servers themselves. So that's why we created that file earlier, so that we'd have a kubeconfig that we could use in a situation just like this. So I'm going to go ahead and run that command. And as you can see, on both nodes, my scheduler is healthy and my controller manager is healthy. And of course, over here on the right, scheduler and controller manager are both healthy. And my two etcd servers are both reporting as healthy on both nodes. So that indicates that everything's up and running so far. Everything that we've set up to this point is working the way that we expect it to. And at this point, we actually have a basic Kubernetes control plane set up and running. In fact, we even have a Kubernetes cluster. We just don't have any worker nodes to actually schedule pods and run containers on. There's a couple more steps that we'll do in this section, but at this point, we have the basic components of a Kubernetes control plane up and running and working.